Welcome in, everybody, to this episode of Discard for Magic, a Summoner Wars podcast. I'm your host, Aaron.
I'm your other host, James, or Jexic, and today we're happy to bring on Nick Conley, the developer and lead playtester for Plaid Hat Games.
Thanks, guys. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. Nick, why don't you start out by just giving us a little background on how you became a part of Plaid Hat?
Sure. Well, as many Plaid Hat stories begin, it starts with Heroescape. Heroescape came out when I was in middle school, and it just really captured my fascination. So I got as much Heroescape as I could and was just really into that game. And then started browsing the internet for Heroescape stuff, and I found Heroescapers, the fan website run by Colby at the time. And so I would just kind of lurk around there and eat up as much Heroescape content as I could. So from there was a advertisement banner for Summoner Wars that Colby put up when he started Plaid Hat Games, and I was really excited to try that game out and kind of jump into it from the ground level. And it just looked like something that would be right up my alley, basically distilling the Heroescape essence down into a card game. So I got that game as a gift and just played it into the ground. Like, my paper playmats were so disheveled by the end of my first edition of Summoner Wars playtime. But from Summoner Wars, I just stayed dialed into Plaid Hat's releases. And the next big moment was when Ashes was up for playtesting. And very similar, I was like, I got to get in on this game on the ground floor, and I want to do everything I can for this game. So I became an Ashes playtester and fell in love with that game. I would go to every tournament I could, and I live in Michigan and Plaid Hat was in Ohio, so it wasn't out of the question for me to go to tournaments that Isaac was running and other people kind of in the Plaid Hat network in Ohio and the Origins convention. So I kind of met Isaac from those events and just kind of became a well-known play tester to him. And he really supported my kind of passion for working on that game. And I became lead play tester for that game at some point in its 1.0 edition. Then eventually Ashes got canceled somewhere in the Asmodee story. The game was deemed unviable to continue, but it wasn't until Colby bought back Plaid Hat in 2020 that the community was like, are you going to bring back Ashes? Are you going to bring back Summoner Wars? There was kind of this hunger for Plaid Hat to return to some of its previous titles. So at that same time, Isaac had moved on to start his own company, Rose Gauntlet. And when Colby asked who he should hire to continue Ashes, if Isaac wasn't going to do it, he passed the recommendation to me. And I've been here for about 3 years now at Plaid Hat.
What I'm hearing is if you want to work for Plaid Hat, you have to start with Heroescape.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Did you ever read my stuff on Heroescapers, or was it
I definitely do remember your name around the forums and the Plaid Hat forums too. I can't remember exactly what you did, but yeah, definitely remembered you around.
Yeah, because I wrote way too much on the Heroescape.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. What a game. It has brought a lot of people together.
And there's still people playing. They're organizing their own mini conventions.
Well, there was a Kickstarter Hasbro kind of botched at one point, or it wasn't on Kickstarter, but it was on their own website or whatever to
Right.
bring Heroescape back.
And now I think Renegade is bringing it back, so I think it's actually coming back now in a year or two.
Well, I'm excited to see what comes out of that, because Heroescape will always have a soft spot in my heart as being just what really brought me into hobby gaming.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. like it gets competitive, but there's also like a certain amount of like you can't take yourself too seriously playing Heroescape because you're just
Yeah.
you got a bunch of pre-painted miniatures and you have like revolutionary soldiers fighting orcs and stuff like that.
Yeah. And you bought it at Toys R Us.
If you had to choose between Ashes and Summoner Wars, because obviously you like both a lot,
Mhm.
Oh, you're asking him a tough question,
I'm
huh?
asking him tough questions. I want to know which one he likes just a little bit more.
Oh man. I mean, I have to give it to Ashes. That is really my baby now, and it's an honor and joy to work on Summoner Wars, but there's only so much influence I have over the game of Summoner Wars. And yeah, Ashes, I feel like just very, very happy to be carrying the torch that Isaac passed to me there. So I just love the game, and so many of my friendships still to this day have come because of Ashes, just meeting people at Gen Con tournaments and hanging out past that. Like the community that developed from uh, that era in my life has just been really important to me. And I very much thank Isaac and Ashes for a big part of my life.
So if you had to get an Ashes related tattoo, what would it be?
Ooh. Probably just a big old face of Jessa on my back. Freak people out. I don't actually have any tattoos. I never really thought about getting one.
I don't either, but I've strongly considered getting like a cloaks tattoo after they named the second cloak summoner after me, and I've been thinking about this for like a decade, and I haven't done it yet.
The faction symbols are like perfect for a little tattoo.
Yeah, I think faction symbol. Like now, I'm thinking, I'm not as good with the cloak, so maybe I get like a tundra orc symbol or a cave goblin symbol, something simple.
Yeah, that's cool.
Brub's face just tattooed on your arm.
Yeah, yeah, but face be a little harder to explain. Just like a bow symbol, or like 16 bow symbols down.
16 bows. There you go.
So, Nick, why don't you take us a little bit into like what exactly does your job entail? Obviously, you work on Ashes and Summoner Wars, but like, what's the ins and out looks like?
I spend a lot of time hanging out on Discord in my two playtest servers where I have conversation and playtest games with the groups of playtesters that have kind of developed for both of those games. And a lot of my job is just keeping games of Summoner Wars steadily open in my tabs. Like, I need that hands-on experience playing the new factions to really make any kind of informed decision on what to recommend to Colby and Joe. So I'll play a bunch of games, I'll read all the feedback, kind of synthesize it into a proposal for every update, and then I'll have a meeting with Colby and Joe every so often, maybe about once a week or so. We try and get an update, but that kind of ebbs and flows with just where we are in the playtest cycle. So I'll put my proposal out there. I'll get told why it's stupid, and we'll work on something else and try and we'll go back and forth, kind of making cases for why we want to do changes this way or that way. And then I patiently wait for Joe to code it, and then it gets deployed, and I tell the playtesters, go play the new update. And then we play a bunch more games and rinse and repeat. So that's really the focus of kind of how my daily job looks like for Summoner Wars. And I do a bunch of other little things for Plaid Hat, like I will answer the like customer service questions about game rules, or how are we supposed to do this, am I missing this, whatever. So I kind of get funneled a lot of those questions. Sometimes I'm digging through my archive of old Plaid Hat games that somebody is still playing, and they're asking me a very specific detail about this one game that released a decade ago, and I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I going to find the answer to this? But I try my best.
Like Dungeon Run or something.
Yeah. Like, okay, let's see. I'm also an art director for Ashes, so every card that we make needs a piece of art, and somebody has to tell the artist what to do for that piece of art. So that's another surprisingly large part of my day is going back and forth with my artists. It's usually the first thing I do because it's other people are reliant on that feedback to continue with their work. So I try and keep as up to date on going back and forth with art direction feedback, keeping our artists employed, giving them timely feedback to keep working on things. And also, art tends to be the bottleneck, at least with Ashes, because there's so many pieces of art that has to get done for an Ashes set compared to Summoner Wars. There's a little bit less. That's usually the bottleneck in development, where I'm kind of waiting for the last few pieces of art to get done before we can put the files together and get it ready for production. So however promptly I can get through art, the better. But you're kind of always, because it takes so long, you're always doing this dance of like, oh, what cards do I think are in a good place in play testing, like design and balance wise, that if we start the art piece, I think the final card will relate to that. And sometimes you have to make drastic last minute changes to cards, and you're like, I really hope the art is like related to that enough or not. But sometimes you get some weird ones where it's like, yeah, that was an old idea that did not see the light of day. So yeah, a strangely interconnected part of the process is art direction.
As with a lot of people at Plaid Hat, you wear many hats. So
That's right.
Ashes, for anybody who hasn't tried it yet, though, is a fantastic game. I used to own a copy of the first edition. I liked it a fair amount. For that time slot, I just like Summoner Wars a little bit better, so I ended up getting rid of it. But I haven't tried the second edition yet, and I'm interested at some point to test it out and see what changes were made, because the first edition I thought was really good, and the art is amazing.
Yes, we love our Ashes art.
And I assume you're working with new artists now, or
Yeah, we had a single artist for Ashes when it was first launched, and eventually she moved on to. She's very, very talented and has a large audience, and yeah, just moved on for reasons that I don't know. I wasn't really part of the company at the time. We had transitioned over to a couple other artists in 1.0 and brought them back on when we started Reborn again, and so we have kind of a two art studios that we have pretty steady work for them constantly. That's a Polar Engine and Gunship Revolution, and they have teams of artists that will work on Ashes kind of nonstop. So it's pretty cool,
cool.
and I'm really happy with their work too. They're fabulous artists.
So diving back into the Summoner Wars aspect,
Yes.
current factions being tested, like what's in the works for Summoner Wars? What's happening? Give us some insight into that.
Sure. We are in a bit of an interesting crossroads in playtesting where we have two factions in testing right now, which is usually not the case. We usually will start and end a faction before launching the other one. And the two that are in the works right now, if you've been following Martin Abel's art posts, you'll know it's the Shimmer Sea Fae and the Storm Goblins. These are the two factions that will be finishing up wave 4. I guess it's wave 4. Yeah. My favorite era of cards. I'm sure people have heard me mention that on Summoner Wars podcasts elsewhere, but it's the golden age of Summoner Wars design. I really like this wave. So the Shimmer Sea Fae are light and water. They're currently, they need a lot of work still, so I won't say too much about them. We actually started playtesting them first, hit some dead ends where we're like, ah, man, the concepts we were going for just aren't quite working out very well. So we're going to put them on pause. And we did that because when Plaid Hat got together for one of their summits, we do this once or twice a year. Everyone gets together and we just do a bunch of play tests and brainstorm together. And it just kind of a good company get together. But Colby had the Storm Goblins ready for alpha testing, and I sat down for a game of them, and I was like, wow, these are really cool and really fresh. And then we played a couple more games, and it's like, wow, they still feel good. So it was a really good opportunity for us to be like, we're kind of stuck on the Shimmer Sea Fae right now. Why don't we just put them on hold? The Storm Goblins feel really good and ready for testing, like unusually good for where they are in development, which was like basically brand new. But we're like, yeah, just put them up. I think we can crank them out pretty fast, and then we'll return to the Fae when we've had a little bit of time away from them and can come at them with a fresh set of eyes. So Storm Goblins, their summoner has this ability Circuit where it just says anything adjacent to it also has Circuit. But that means they'll pass Circuit on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So you're making this orthogonal connection of units. And then the summoner can electrocute everything in that circuit for 1 damage. So it's a very kind of combo movement based deck where you're really hyper fixated on, can I make a chain to their summoner to zap them? And there's all sorts of goblin-y tricks that go in there. They are Air Trickster, or whatever it's actually called. I'm so bad with what the symbols are actually called. I will never stop saying Trickster. I will never stop saying Primal. I know they're the wrong ones, but I couldn't tell you what the real ones are. Do you guys know? Do they have names?
I mean, I've heard cunning sometimes,
Cunning, yeah.
or air.
Well, I'm a trickster diehard, so Air Trickster, incredibly mobile symbols there, and it really comes through in like how much movement you need to connect all of these goblins into an electric chain to zap things. So you got little guys flying on kites to get over gates, and you have these little volt swappers that can warp to anywhere in the circuit, and just lots of cool goblin-y tricks. And goblin factions are always my favorite. There's just something special about the way we deliver on like the comedy and the theme of playing as goblins is just really fun. There's always like some level of self-destructive nature in them. Like sand goblins can blow up a bunch of stuff. Storm goblins very similarly can just blow up a bunch of their own stuff, and there's just something fun in Summoner Wars with those types of effects to me.
As a tester, they've been really fun to play and try out. Storm Goblins they've been a blast. Very electric.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of always happens towards the end of playtest cycles where as we start feeling like they're about to become a reality, the worry starts to rise and we're like, "Oh no, we need to really be careful with this thing. This might not be right. This might not be right." It starts to the reality of it kind of sets in, and so we really are kind of in the final stages for Storm Goblins now, where the core concept is really fun. The units feel balanced, but we really need to polish the final details. And my my least favorite part of Summoner Wars playtesting is working on starting setups. Oh boy, do we spend time figuring out starting setups. And it's so like it's very methodical to like go through and check everything, but because you got to match this up against that, match this up against that, match this up against that, and like almost every starting setup is different. So every little change you make has a ripple effect and changes all the other starting setups. So one thing I've been really trying to do as of late, because it's only gotten harder to work on starting setups, is to try and duplicate them. It's Wayfarers has a duplicate of Eternal Council, I think, and that's kind of become a go-to starting setup, is like the Tetris Z or whatever, the Tetris S shape, where if the more we can repeat them, the fewer starting setup matchups we have to check. And it's like, if it's a good shape, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I don't think there's a ton to gain from being like, and every faction on top of all their other unique things and their starting setups different. It's like most people probably don't care about that. It just needs to be functional to start the game off and not create polarizing matchups. Oh, they're too good if they go first, or there's nothing to attack if the enemy goes first against them, stuff like that. But like, man, it's just a pain in the butt working on starting setups. I hate it.
Yeah, luckily we have a couple people in the community who tend to focus on that a lot. Like
Yes,
Kowloon
yes.
does a lot of that. I also hate starting setups. I tend to just like when the discussion shifts towards that, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, it's a drag. It's cool to see some of the like heuristics or like rules of thumb we develop where it's like, okay, the goblins, they really seem to have these aggressive tendencies, and a third row gate will cause problems with that. So that's something I've kind of like filed away where I'm like, okay, goblins or aggro factions probably just need a second row gate because we've gone down this road so many times. So like, do we want to keep trying it differently and come to the same conclusions, or do we just want to start shortcutting it and you know go with these rules of thumb? So it's gotten better. There was definitely a steep learning curve as we kept trying different starting setups to make each faction unique, and I was like, well, why are we even bothering with that? Let's just cut this workload down for something that's not super core to the game's promise, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the starting setups really like started when we were testing Wayfarers, which was a problem because they have such a big reach. Like before that, we would talk like about like different units maybe in the starting setup, but actually changing the starting setup around a lot, I think really started with Wayfarers.
Yeah, the more a faction is centered around movement and aggression and the ability to like choke gate points, it's like it really magnifies the importance of how the game kicks off with the starting setup. And yeah, Wayfarers had a super polarizing playtest experiences as well. That was one of the most difficult factions.
Yeah, we tested like 12 different starting setups, all sorts of different starting setups. For people who don't know, how does someone become a playtester and like what does that entail?
Yeah, so just message me on Discord is probably the best way. We don't have our playtest sign up link like publicly posted on the website. Usually, people that we want as playtesters are known around the community, play the game a lot, and are kind of like just yeah, just well known individuals on the Discord. So message me. I'll get you in there. But like, even if you're new and are curious about trying it out, just like message me. We're happy to have you there. Like I don't limit the number of people that come in as play testers. Every once in a while I'll clear out people that haven't been around in a while just for my own sanity. Kind of tidy things up in the Discord so they don't get too bloated. But as for your responsibilities, we ask that you play 15 games of a faction from its like start to end point, which we have like between 1 and 2 months to get a faction play testing completed, because we aim to release decks every 3 months, and if we're doing 2 decks, we have about a month and a half for each of them to roughly stay on that schedule, but as with all things in production, it depends. If you get your 15 games in, we'll give you some store credit, which can get you the factions that you worked on for free, which is a nice bonus to have. And it's the least we can do for all the effort that the playtesters put in to make this game as good as it is. And there's tons of playtesters that just far and away exceed that expectation and have really made it a big part of their Summoner Wars time. And like, I mean, it's your hobby, it's a lifestyle game, and to put all those hours and game sessions into just playtesting is really I'm very grateful for it. And the more people around, the better. More people are likely to match up with you, and it's really great that you can play the game asynchronously for playtesting. Like I said earlier, I just kind of try and always have games going, whether I'm taking turns constantly or kind of just as I get to it. It's a easy game to be play testing even kind of passively alongside other tasks. So join the Summoner Wars playtest. Message me on Discord. I'm Nick Conley, Marimbist11. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, it's a big change from I play tested a little bit on first edition, and print and play was just so much more like time consuming, and like being able to have like a dedicated app that Joe has made for us to use to playtest just makes it a lot more streamlined and a lot easier to playtest. And some people put out a lot of games.
We used to just like have to use Vassal, and so you had to know, like, you had to enforce all the rules yourself, and like you couldn't see how many cards were in people's hands, and that was an important part of Summon Wars gameplay. So at the end of your turn, you'd say, "I'm done. I've got 4 cards in my hand," or whatever. And most of those were still played live. We would try to play them live because it was just easier to organize. So you'd have like one live game going. It's come a long way.
Yeah, it's such an advantage to have the Summoner Wars online app. Just the game volume we have is way higher than like Ashes by comparison, which involves like booting a tabletop simulator or whatever, printing out your cards and whatever. Like that is a laborious task. And like I've done my very fair share of print and play Ashes testing and a bunch of other Plaid Hat games in the past before I was even employed. I tried to play test basically everything that came out, but it's a lot of work and printing stuff out is not cheap or easy or whatever. It's like it's a big commitment and a big gift to do that. So to just be able to open up the browser and play games until your heart's content is really, really nice. My goal is always to get 100 games in for a faction in playtesting, and sometimes the cycles are a little too short to do that, or I'm pulled in other directions for Ashes or whatnot. But 100 games is always my goal.
Speaking of being pulled in other directions, you also develop some of the factions. Are there any factions that aren't yet in playtesting that are you're developing or working on that you could give us any sneak peek or snippet of?
Yes, sure. So I tend to Colby will post a faction idea. I'll throw my notes in there. We'll go back and forth, and something will come out of it. So, like Crimson Order was a very collaboratively developed faction between all of us as we were kind of thinking about, okay, where do we want to center this idea? Colby pulled back the Blood Drain ability from first edition that used to be on a Fallen Kingdom dude. We're like, okay, vampire leader, and then I really wanted to emphasize the cultist theme because we have the Hellfire cultist from Fallen Kingdom, and I'm like, this feels like a really good opportunity to cement the idea that cultists are zero cost units with a destroy effect. So I was really pushing for that, and it came through in the end with the devout cultist and the doom cultist both follow that exact same framework. So I really like kind of having those cycles of cards or classes of units that you're like, okay, yeah, I know these guys. So the idea of like the vampire cult really came from fusing those ideas together. But as for future decks, so there's the Filth we're working on. They're very difficult to figure out in the framework of second edition. So there's a lot of big picture questions we're still working out there. We also have Divine Nature in works. Actually, Donald, another one of our coworkers, he's our big idea guy. He loves to just throw ideas at us and he says, "Do with it what you want, but here's my idea." So he's a very big picture idea thinker kind of guy. He made freelancers. Um, but he came up with the idea for the Mother Tree faction, which is Divine Nature, and the the pitch is you have your summoner as an immobile tree in the middle of the battlefield. It might even take up like 2 or 4 card slots. Who knows? It's just an idea, but you have this big immobile tree, and then everything you're summoning is like trying to defend the mother tree. So we're like, okay, that like really sounds cool, and we love fresh ideas that give us factions that play in completely different ways, but still work within the rules framework of Summoner Wars, which is really fascinating when you get something unique out of there. Storm Goblins being a big one like that. But so Donald wrote up his he came up with a whole faction framework for the Mother Tree faction, and then he kicked it over to me, and he's like, "Do what you do with this." And so I went through, kind of made it all put units in like the stat blocks where they belong, make their abilities more um, cohesive with what we actually have in the game. Um, and I think we have a pretty cool direction for that faction coming. So we haven't done any testing for that faction yet, and it's probably not going to be called Mother Tree. I don't know. We'll come up with another name for it, but you get the idea with that one. So I'm pretty excited for that one, and I certainly have had my hand in polishing up that one a bit.
Yeah. I mean, this is just me bouncing ideas that you may or may not take, but it makes me think like after I saw like the Shimmer Sea Fae, I started thinking, what if they had Fae in other like locales? Like, so like maybe that could be like some kind of like a woodland Fae, yeah, or like fire sprites or things like that or whatever else. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun playing with the new species and but like we just did the Groaks, which are a frog species. Like it's fun to come up with these new fantasy creatures and explore just very different looking factions instead of always doing another orc, dwarf, and goblin faction. But of course, we come back to them when the time's right. So yeah, the Fae are a new one for Summoner Wars for sure.
Yeah, lots of really good stuff. That sounds awesome. That tree faction. Another faction you created though is the Wayfarers.
Yeah,
Why don't you start by just telling us like a little bit about how that came about and give us some insight on them?
sure. So Wayfarers was maybe Colby testing me. He said, "Why don't you take a stab at designing the Wayfarers? The restriction is you have to try and use the Gem Clan art from Crystal Clans." So, uh, savvy Plaid Hat fans may recognize some of those art pieces, or at least the style of them. I think Martin went back and polished up some of the characters, like the Gem Dancer. I think got an update. Celeste was a character, but then we decided to just make her from scratch because the summoners really ought to be a center, like a good centerpiece looking character. They're going to be on the front of the package, and it's like that's what the game's about. So I think we did her from scratch and a couple units here and there, but that was the restriction. And I really love that process of having a box that I have to work within. Uh, Having the blank canvas is very difficult for me. I often don't know what directions to go, but when it's like, okay, you have these art pieces to work with, or this exact mechanic that we need, it's like, okay, I can piece that together. So I have my old Wayfarer notes somewhere of like the original ideas that I posted to playtesters at one point to see like how far did Wayfarers come from their original idea. And th- there was quite a lot of similarities, a lot more swapping around. Things were just like flying all over the place in the original ideas. But anyways, I had like the Gem Clan characters that I had to work with. So like the Ruby Dancer, that was one that I was like, okay, this needs to do some kind of flipping around thing, and pretty quickly landed on the ability that it has now. Before it attacks, it can swap positions with a common. Maybe at one point it was like place it on the opposite side of the common or move anywhere adjacent to it. I guess bigger picture. So Wayfarers, they had to be spirit and trickster, and I needed to kind of come up with a story and a motivation for the Wayfarers. Like, who are they? What do they want to do? And I kind of landed on this aspiring explorer theme where they just have this insatiable appetite to go see the world. And I thought I thought it was fun to kind of put like a positive spin on that instead of making them necessarily like too thievy or like mischievous. Like I wanted to emphasize that spirit side of them where yeah, maybe they'll get into a little bit of trouble, but they have good hearts. They have very good hearts. So my favorite card in the Wayfarers is Seek the Horizon, the event card that asks you to get one of your units to the other side of the board. And so much of the deck is about that forward momentum, getting to the other side of the battlefield. That was the main mechanical hook that I wanted to convey that theme that I came up with for the Wayfarers. So they're spirited adventures. And how do they demonstrate that? They're stronger the more they travel. So that's where you get Celeste's ability. She gains strength the more units you have on the other side of the battlefield.
I really like the Eager Adventurer. I think that's a fun ability there where like you added a new ability where they come in with 2 boosts and then you can kind of use them to just embark and move forward, which goes with that main theme you were talking about. has a lot of applications in deck building when you can do other thing with those boosts, and that's what's kind of fun about them. You can combine them with, say, like a border archer and do entangling, and then they can do the swift shot without having to not move, that kind of thing.
Very nice. Yeah. Yeah. The boost system is so flexible, and it is just kind of a generic hook for all the other decks that use boost to interact with it in a new way. So we do have to be careful with just general boost economy. If a unit came into play with 5 boost, but spend like 3 of them to do its thing, like that wouldn't really make sense, and it would make things like Chant of Power way too good. So like a boost has to roughly equal the same thing. It's like it's got to be a stat point or a movement space or something smaller like that. So
Yeah.
as you're flowing them around or giving them to units, we're not breaking the boost economy anywhere in there. Swamp Orcs were a big test of that.
Yeah, swamp orcs have a lot of boost economy as they grow their swamp. But you're in a unique position where not only did you create the Wayfarers, but you're also one of the strongest, if not the strongest, player with them. You represented them in the last Tournament of Champions and did very well with them. So, what are like some key tips you have for people who are just learning the faction to make like some strong plays with Wayfarers?
Sure. Well, thank you. Yeah. Wayfarers are a really fun deck to play, I think, because it asks you to coordinate with your units. Uh, None of the units are like too strong on their own, but it's when they start overlapping and combining their powers with each other's position or double attacking a single target that they really start to shine. And the epic event, coordinate. It's in the title of the event. You need to coordinate your units. So when they're adjacent to each other, they get more strength. And then that can be really useful for all sorts of things because you can change the position of your units or attack differently all the time. The eager adventurer, since you can force that anytime on your turn, you might do an attack, force it out of the way, and then a spirit voyager can attack through where they used to be. And that spirit voyager can easily warp to that adventurer because of its ability, the spirit leap. So all these units, they kind of like function in pairs, and you can really pair up any 2 common units in that deck and get like a pretty tangible synergy there. So I really recommend trying to pair up your units like that. I think high momentum to the other side of the battlefield is the other major thing. Your summoner demands it to do anything. Celeste has just basic stats, but she can really crank up the heat if you keep that momentum going. She can be a steady 6 strength summoner, which is ridiculous, especially with all the range and agility that she has built in. I really think you need to not be afraid to go on that adventure. Follow the theme of the deck, follow what your summoner's asking you to do, because you also have good bailout plans for the Wayfarers. You have Slip By, which is a very flexible event that can let Celeste bounce around diagonally at any time on the turn. So if an attack doesn't go your way, or you just want to go in for a risky pot shot, you can slip away after that and not get so punished for that. And there's also the Astral Waypoint. This is a cool little travel spot that can warp your units around. It's a structure, so you can plant one back home and send your adventurers on their way. And if they need to quickly warp out, you can swap places with that waypoint. Don't be afraid. Go on that adventure. Coordinate your units. They're a team.
One thing that people bring up sometimes is like, what do you do when when you're facing a faction or an opponent that makes it really hard for you to get to the other side,
Yes.
or just hard to get to their summoner? I mean, I saw some games where you played against, say, like the fungal dwarves, where you actually did pretty well, and that's typically a tough one because it's just like, what do I do about these beasts and everything that is in my way?
That is a very tough matchup, and I still think about that one game in the Tournament of Champions, and I got super lucky to not die to a double demand attack, but the that was super fun.
It was a close one.
The key there was just relentless forward pressure and choking all the space out of giving the fungal dwarves room to kind of blossom and cultivate that garden strategy. It's just you can squeeze in almost anywhere as the Wayfarers. You have enough resources available to you. You can go anywhere on the board. It's really a serious threat, but it's just a matter of how much will it cost for you to do that. A common counter strategy against the Wayfarers is to try and build a barrier of gates on the middle row. So that's a really easy spot for the Wayfarers to typically occupy as they cross over the border. They get all those benefits, but they're not too far forward. So gates on that fourth row is a good way to kind of block the Wayfarers' typical advances and a lot of their early plays. So it's going to be tough to get around that if your opponent draws their gates early and employs that strategy. But what's kind of nice is I think the Wayfarers are able to play well all the way to the side of one map. So even if that barrier kind of pops up in the middle, you're still able to do a lot in a narrow lane on the side because you have the diagonal attacking, and the Spirit Voyagers can warp further down and branch off to the side. So there's still a lot of gameplay you have there, even in narrow spaces. Wayfarers really excel in narrow spaces for that reason, as long as they're able to keep Celeste beefed up, because they really need that firepower to threaten not just assassinations, but just clean kills on bulky commons, which are otherwise pretty difficult to handle.
Yeah, I think a lot of players also struggle with their champions because they have 3 champions who are all pretty good. Baldo kind of sometimes overshadows the other 2.
Yeah, Baldo. Everyone loves him, right?
Yeah, he's great. But the other 2 are also very good in their own right and have their own unique abilities.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's definitely start with Boldo. I mean, 5 magic for solid stats and just an amazing ability. It's a double ability. It works after he moves and he attacks. You can place him diagonal. I mean, this is Celeste's best friend and really emphasizes the focus fire nature of the Wayfarers, how they can, if they get their like sights on a single target, they can put a lot of attacks onto that one thing. So Boldo can attack, jump out of the way, Celeste can attack, or you can do the reverse. Celeste can attack, Boldo can attack, and then jump in front of her for some cover. So his ability to play very aggressive and defensively and pair with your summoner, it's another one of those 2 unit synergies. Boldo plus Celeste is kind of like the peak of Wayfarer power if you can get that going. And if they can't touch Boldo, he can stick around for a really, really long time, and that's a problem.
Like approach the champs. Do you try and always play Baldo every game? Do you hold for Baldo?
I will definitely prioritize Boldo as much as I can, but that's not to say the other champions aren't great and have their places. So there's Gusto. I think his ability stayed around from almost the very beginning. I really like him when you have a Seek the Horizon down. He's a very efficient way to just throw 2 more spaces of movement towards getting your Seek the Horizons completed. And he can also stick around for a really long time. Playing back at home, he can just kind of pick off things with his range 3 attack as he stays kind of conservatively back on the Wayfarer side of the map, taking good attacks here and there. But really, his ability to force things 2 spaces gives you a lot more options for going after enemies. So it's a really, really tight synergy he has there with supporting all the other things, and another champion that the more turns you keep it around, the more you're going to benefit from it. And he's on the cheaper side too with the 4 magic, so he can be a little easier to weave into turns, but there's definitely games where you don't need what he's offering. The enemy has kind of clashed with you right in the middle, and getting extra movement isn't really going to change like where you need to be focusing. So that can be a good time to get rid of him. And then there's Tess. Tess is the last champion. She's got a really weird ability, warping with your structures. And the tough thing about using Tess is you need your gates to be in positions where they could attack things, and because it's going to become her. So there can be really subtle changes with where you think you should place your gates if you think you're going to be playing a test game. Think about, okay, if this were to become a unit, would it be attacking the things that I want? Is it just kind of blocked up against their gate? Okay, maybe that's not too useful. Is it kind of, is my enemy funneling down this one lane, and do I want to have Tess right there at the right time? Kind of one of the big powers of Tess is just that she exists. So the enemy has to be afraid of your gates in a strange way where it's like, well, if they got the 5 magic, that's just another trick up their sleeve that they could pull. And the sum of all of those tricks that the Wayfarers have makes it really hard to reliably defend yourself. And that's kind of one of the highlighting features of a trickster deck is they're kind of going to get the one up on you when it comes to like trying to outsmart them positionally or defensively. It's like they have the ways to do it. They may or may not have the exact one they need in their hand, but the opponent doesn't know that, so that pressure adds up.
Another interesting thing with Tess is that she can also swap with your astral waypoints. When you have one of those down, it really just warps the board in weird ways too, and can cause a bit of analysis paralysis on your part where you're like, wait, can I get a kill with the waypoint and Tess?
Yeah, you start doing like double swaps and you're like, "Oh, wait, what?" I tend to shy away from those. It's too much thinking for me.
I've seen you say other places that you don't like the cloaks as much because it's too much sometimes. But
Yeah, it's too much. It's too much. In Fallen Kingdom, I just literally don't understand how those effects work, so I don't play them.
I don't understand how I can get a hand that actually does the things my opponents do.
I know, like, I'll just like, okay, you got 5 zombies out and everything blew up and what? I just, like, summon a undead archer and they die to a 1 cost unit. Like, I don't get it.
What's your strategy for discarding cards for magic with the Wayfarers?
I definitely want to end turns with enough magic to summon 2 units, which could be as low as 1 or 2 magic if you have one of the rogues. Rogues, I basically never discard. They're like a very, very potent 0 cost unit. And the fact that the Wayfarers gain so much benefit from grouping up their units, it's a really invaluable common to just throw into the mix. So I would really hesitate to ever discard a Wayward Rogue. Same goes for Eager Adventurer. They also pair really well with every other unit in the deck, and they got a robust 3 strength melee, which is the strongest common in the deck in terms of raw damage output. They got a lot of reach, so I think those are kind of my bread and butter commons as much as I can do. The other ones are a bit more situational. Spirit Voyager's very powerful and can go for assassinations and just other pairing ups because it relies on another unit to be any good. So that's another reason why you want to make sure you have magic to summon multiple things. A Spirit Voyager alone is nothing special. So if my hand is like a bunch of Spirit Voyagers, I'm probably going to build all of them except for one and try and draw a better synergy unit to go with that. So a lot of my turns, I'm like ending with like the 3 or 4 magic count, I would say. As for like going for a champion, you have decks like Tundra Orcs where it's like if you just build to 5 and draw a champion, you might be able to make good use out of it. Whoever it is, it's like, oh, you got Shonk, nice. Oh, you got Ragnar, that's fine too. Maybe Targan, you're like, maybe I need 6 magic to summon another friend alongside her. But generally, I would say I don't kind of shoot for that champion gambit because if I'm summoning Boldo, I need to be ready to put Celeste in there, use Boldo, and like focus my game plan on that altogether. So I'm kind of happy to wait until I draw a champion to start setting up to summon it. I don't really need to just flop into it and then go because as with everything Wayfarers, the synergy is important. They're no shonk. They don't just get it done on raw stats. So you gotta have a plan with them. And if you just leave them out to dry, they're not gonna get it done.
Yeah, I find like when I would play Wayfarers too that it's kind of like you were saying. If you get too many of the same common, might discard some, and I think also maybe you're a little able to discard more commons than you might with other decks, just because you can get them back with Seek the Horizon.
Yeah. Good reason to kind of seed your discard pile with some variety early on, and you're able to.
you don't want to trigger your seek and get 2 cards back, you know, and
Yeah, it feels terrible. No. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, definitely you can build some commons early just to get things going there. Man, Seek the Horizon, you could write like a master's thesis on how to play this card. There's people that are like, why would you never play Seek the Horizon when you draw it? And well, it's like, well, maybe I really need a magic next turn, and I'm just kind of killing my tempo by playing a Seek the Horizon that I may not ever trigger. Who knows? Like, if I get that Seek the Horizon in my opening hand, I might be building that as magic, but I don't know. It really just depends. Obviously, you want to trigger them, but it's not a freebie. It takes work for the Wayfarers to do that, and it's you really kind of want to be doubling down on like I'm going to the end so I can shoot their summoner for 3 and then I'll trigger it. Like usually throwing a unit all the way that way just to trigger Seek the Horizon is not going to be a very good value play. But and then there's also like matchups. Okay, this is a value matchup. I really need to have fuel for the long game, or this game's starting to grind to a halt, and their summoner has a lot of life. I'm gonna need more units to get this done, so I better try and trigger both of my Seek the Horizons. It's a very interesting event, just how it plays out over the course of the game to me.
Yeah, it's also sometimes just the threat of the Seek the Horizon can make your opponent play so differently. I found in like one of the deck building games where somebody took a Seek the Horizon, and also in a league game a while back, I was winning on econ in both, but it was like close. So
Yeah.
I knew if I let them get a Seek the Horizon, I'm gonna lose on econ. And so I just had to keep blocking paths. And it hurt my gameplay other ways because I was like, I can't let them Seek the Horizon, otherwise I'm going to lose this game. And in the deck building one, they also had ramming advance, and they were just
Whoa.
waiting to just go all the way down the entire board. So I had to block every
Ramming
lane.
advance. Cool.
I was like, I don't know how you stop that. Then they never even Seek the Horizon. They just ended up killing me.
Was that a
I
Vargath
think it'd have to be
deck?
Vargath, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Wow, that sounds cool.
It was really popular in the last, deck building tournament.
Cool. Yeah, man, Vargath is a cool
I don't
deck
know, like
building.
25 to 30% of the decks were Mon Vargath.
Wow. I mean that summoner is just like everything you want. It's super easy to apply to anything, really. I mean, who doesn't want more strength than a big beefy goat on your side?
What matchups do you think are like the toughest for Wayfarers? We touched on like fungal dwarves for a second there, but what other matchups do you think they really struggle with?
Yeah, aside from Fungal Dwarfs, which is definitely a tough one, but is really grown on me as just like a thrilling experience in Summoner Wars, just trying to figure out that puzzle. It's very bombastic. But Cave Goblins is a notoriously awful matchup for the Wayfarers, and it was a very contentious topic in playtesting, figuring out, okay, how are the Wayfarers going to survive this matchup? And kind of the traditional way to handle cave goblins is have access to ping damage, bonus damage outside of your 3 attacks. And you'll notice the Wayfarers have 0 of that. Much to some players' frustration. It's not the most popular take, but I am okay with bad matchups existing in Summoner Wars if it means the faction designs stay very compelling and unique and different. Like, um, we're naturally going to run into like, oh geez, like this particular matchup is really bad. And how much do you sacrifice to throw in some just ping damage for the Wayfarers to handle this one Cave Goblins matchup? Does it start over tuning other matchups? Now they have way too much output for other things. Like it's the trade-offs, and every little change in a Summoner Wars deck has big ripple effects. So I definitely err on the side of like accepting a difficult matchup if I really like where the faction is otherwise. And maybe it has like 15 balanced matchups, 2 awful matchups, 2 phenomenal matchups. That's going to be pretty okay in my book. So the Cave Goblin matchup, you hate to see it. I don't envy you if you go up against it, but it is possible. The Cave Goblins are very good at overloading the Wayfarers. Yeah, how do you stop it? I think keeping your rogues alive is pretty important, using their diagonal attacks to hide behind things and because they can kill goblins, the like little relentless slingers with their 2 melee reliably. So making the most use of that to take out the little guys and trying to get like a 2-for-1 trade out of them is really good. So you just can't let the goblins overwhelm you with those relentless attacks because it's just going to add up.
I found that gem dancers are decent in that matchup,
Yeah, I really like them. The bulk helps out a lot.
and you can swap and take their gate spots, that kind of thing.
Yeah, slow down the summoning because if the just a kind of avalanche of goblins are coming your way, that's tough to stave off. So yeah, definitely get that swapper going. I like them for that matchup. We didn't talk much about the I call it a swapper. Didn't talk much about the gem dancer there, but generally I would say that's a situational comment for me. Very opportunistic. You see a board position where it's like, oh, that swap is really juicy. Swap their common and like kick it behind you, and then Celeste is like, bang, shoot it for 5. Like they can set up kill shots for her really, really well. So their power really comes from the context. Their base stats are good, but their ability isn't like a always it works. Sometimes you don't even want to swap, just like the way your coordinate turn works out, or like they're in the perfect spot. So you're like, I might not use them, in which case they're just a blank 2/5, which you hope for better. So definitely be on the lookout for the situations where a dancer is viable, and don't summon them as a bread and butter unit. That's more the adventurer and the rogue, I would say.
For people who are just like learning the faction and want a little easier matchup, who do you think they should play against? Matchups that you think Wayfarers really excel in.
Well, everyone likes to beat up on Queen Meldaria, right? I don't know if this is actually a good matchup for them, but Wayfarers have the reach to go punish low life summoners like Meldaria, who has a pathetic 9 HP. So, really having that forward momentum and reach from the Voyagers and big power Celeste can put lights out on the Phoenix Elves pretty quickly, I would say. What else is a good matchup for them?
Some people are saying breakers, I think,
Yeah, I
but
think
I don't know.
Breakers. Yeah, they got those little engage dudes, which are annoying, but I think deceivers are just annoying for everybody face. So I don't think that's unique to Wayfarers. That's one of the most annoying cards in the game.
Dancers and Celeste can actually deal with Deceivers decently, though.
And rogues can hit them from diagonal and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, they got some game against them. Sorry, I got another difficult one. Polar dwarves. Oh boy, I do not like playing against the polar dwarves as the Wayfarers because they just have such a density of beefy structures. Those parapets are just a disaster. You can't move through them, you can't get around them. They're firing down on you through them. It's like, oh, the barrier wall that we were talking about as a counter strategy. The polar dwarves can really excel at that. They can force their gates up to even start taking that front line. So it's like, how do you even get around that? It's a tough one, but I kind of just love the uphill battles for Wayfarers. It's fun to figure it out. You feel like you're on those adventures and trying to get through this terrible terrain.
And it's kind of fun when you can like sneak around behind and like get behind Svara and do a lot of damage. But then the issue then is still, do they have structures in their hand and can they just kind of wiggle their way out and then block themselves in? And then you're like, just like,
Yeah, sometimes you just get trapped in the arena with Svara super closely there, and you're like, oh, I need a waypoint to bail out of here, but we're kind of wailing on each other's structures in each other's face. It's weird. I've seen some of the weirdest games against polar dwarves there. Savara's not quite frail enough to just go snipe a couple of times and call it a game. So you gotta plan for a bit of a grindier game against them, which can be tough for the Wayfarers.
I think another one that I think Joe might mention this when we talked to him about the stats. Swamp orcs, I think, do not great against the Wayfarers because you can get in the swamp so fast.
Yeah, Muglug tends to want to play on her own turf, right? You kind of drop those shamans around you and do a lot of just wiggling around with your units to boost them up, and then bam, you like punch them when they approach you at all. The Wayfarers, they're kind of like, well, you want me to come that way? I was going that way anyway, so that's a bummer for you. So they kind of they have a bit of a punish game against swamp orcs there. They're able to capitalize on that forward advancing and surgically strike those shamans out of there. Shamans are really the heart of the swamp, and Wayfarers are super adept at reaching them and taking away that boost economy from Muglug. They also kind of have pretty good ability, I'd say, to like poke the drudgers. Like you could use a rogue to like kill a drudger instead of having them trigger their ability to save Muglug. You can actually go get them for magic, which is pretty unique and a good way to counter those guys.
Well, Nick, we appreciate you coming on to talk about the Wayfarers and give us some insight into playtesting and developing and just all the things you do at Plaid Hat. Is there any place that people can find you or follow you that you want to shout out?
Yeah, of course. Well, it was great to be on. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about my job and what I do, and I love this game. Thanks for hosting a podcast about it. It's great. These communities mean a lot. But best place to reach me would be on Discord. You can find me in the Summoner Wars Discord or the Ashes Discord or Imbist11, Nick Conley. If you want to do playtesting, just reach out. Be happy to send you the sign up link. You can see how it's all made. Other socials though, not really. I have a dormant Twitter account that I don't log on to, so don't bother with that.
Well, we appreciate everybody listening. This has been Discard for Magic. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
See ya.